Good evening all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight we venture into Canada's most remote and unforgiving territory, where the vast wilderness of the Yukon holds secrets that have remained buried in permafrost and silence for decades. 10 true accounts from those who face the darkness in a land where help is hundreds of kilometers away, and the cold can kill you faster than whatever might be hunting you. These are the stories that law enforcement could not solve, that families have never forgotten, and that survivors can never escape. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now let us step into the shadows of the Yukon wilderness, where civilization ends and terror begins. Working as a bartender in Whitehorse means you get to know people, maybe more than you should. At 28 years old, I had been pouring drinks at the Northern Lights Tavern for almost 3 years, long enough to recognize the regulars by their usual orders and their stories that got longer with each beer. The bar sat on Main Street downtown, one of those places that felt like it had been there since the gold rush days, with its dark wood paneling and antler chandeliers that cast shadows across the worn floorboards. Winter in the Yukon is not like winter anywhere else. By November, we were down to maybe 5 hours of sunlight, and the temperature had already dropped to minus 30 Celsius on most nights. People came to the bar not just to drink, but to escape the darkness and the cold that pressed in from all sides. That is where I met him, Derek Connolly. He started coming in around mid-October, always on Thursday and Saturday nights, always ordering the same thing: Canadian whiskey, neat, and a Molson. He was maybe 45, with thinning brown hair he tried to hide under a baseball cap and a face that might have been handsome once before. The cold and the drinking had weathered it into something harder. He worked maintenance at one of the government buildings, he told me, had moved up from Edmonton 2 years ago for the job. At first, our conversations were normal. Small talk about the weather, the lack of daylight, how he was still adjusting to Yukon winters. He seemed lonely more than anything else, and I felt sorry for him in that way. You feel sorry for anyone trying to make a life in a place that does not make it easy. By late November, something shifted. His visits became more frequent, 3 times a week, then 4. He started staying later, nursing his drinks until I was wiping down tables and stacking chairs, making it clear we were closing. He began asking personal questions that felt too intimate for a bartender and customer relationship. Did I live alone? What time did I finish my shifts? Did I have a boyfriend? I kept my answers vague, professional, the way I had learned to handle customers who got too familiar. But Derek was persistent in a way that made my skin crawl. He would lean across the bar when he spoke to me, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath, close enough to see the way his pale blue eyes never seemed to blink. The first Thursday in December, he asked me out. Just like that, while I was pulling a pint for another customer, he said he had been thinking about me a lot and wanted to take me to dinner somewhere nice. I told him I was flattered but not interested, kept my tone light, professional, the way the owner had taught us to turn people down without causing a scene. Derek smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. He finished his drink in silence and left without leaving a tip. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. He came back the next night, and the night after that. But now he was different. He would sit at the end of the bar, not talking, just watching me work with this intensity that made my hands shake when I poured drinks. Other regulars started noticing. Old Tom, who had been coming to the bar since before I was born, pulled me aside one night and asked if that guy at the end was bothering me. I brushed it off, said he was harmless, probably just lonely, but I did not believe my own words. The messages started a week later. My phone number was on my employee file at work, and somehow Derek had gotten it. The first text came at 2 a.m. Just wanted to say goodnight. Hope you got home safe. It made my stomach turn because I had not told him when my shift ended that night. Then another came the next morning at 6. Morning beautiful. Thinking about you. I blocked his number, but then they started coming from different numbers. 5 different numbers over 3 days, each message getting longer, more detailed, more obsessive. You look tired last night. You should rest more. That blue sweater really brings out your eyes. I saw you at the grocery store on 4th Avenue. You forgot to buy milk. That last one made me go cold. I had been to the grocery store that afternoon, and I had forgotten milk, which meant he had been following me, watching me. I called the RCMP detachment downtown and filed a report. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but not optimistic. Unless he threatened you directly or tried to hurt you, there is not much we can do, she said. Keep records of everything. Do not engage with him. Let us know if it escalates. It felt like being told to wait until something bad happened before anyone could help. I stopped going to the grocery store alone, started parking my car right under the streetlight outside my apartment building on Wood Street. My apartment was a small one-bedroom on the 2nd floor of an old converted house. One of those places with thin walls and creaky floors that landlords rented to young people who could not afford anything better. I had lived there for 2 years without ever feeling unsafe, but now every sound made me jump. Every shadow outside my window could be him. The apartment break-in happened on a Wednesday. I had worked the evening shift and gotten home around 11:30. Everything seemed normal when I walked in. Door was locked, windows closed against the minus 35-degree cold outside. I made tea, got ready for bed, set my alarm for 9 the next morning. It was not until I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth that I noticed it. My toothbrush was wet. Not just damp, but soaking wet, like someone had just used it. My heart started hammering in my chest because I had not used it that morning. I had been running late for a dentist appointment downtown and had brushed my teeth there using the complimentary supplies they kept in the bathroom. I walked through the apartment slowly, turning on every light, checking every corner. That is when I started seeing the other things. My laptop had been moved from my desk to the kitchen table. The throw blanket on my couch was folded perfectly, which I never did. The dishes I had left in the sink that morning were washed and stacked in the drying rack. My bedroom made me want to vomit. The bed was made with hospital corners so tight you could bounce a quarter on them. My clothes that I had left scattered on the floor were folded and placed on my dresser. And on my nightstand, where I kept a framed photo of my parents, there was a note written on a piece of paper torn from my own notebook. You work too hard. Let me take care of you. I called the RCMP immediately. 2 officers came, a young constable who looked barely out of training, and an older sergeant who had the weathered look of someone who had been dealing with the dark side of humanity for too long. They searched the apartment, dusted for fingerprints, took photos of the note. The sergeant asked the obvious question: any sign of forced entry? I showed them the spare key I kept hidden under the mat outside my door, a stupid habit I had kept from my university days when I locked myself out constantly. The key was not there anymore. Derek stopped coming to the bar after that, which somehow made it worse. At least when I could see him, I knew where he was. Now he was out there somewhere, thinking about me, watching me, maybe planning his next move. The RCMP increased patrols around my building and the bar, but Whitehorse is a small city with limited resources, and they could not watch me 24 hours a day. I started staying with my friend Michelle in her place across town, sleeping on her couch, jumping at every noise. The night it all came to a head was December 18th. The northern lights were visible that night, sheets of green and purple dancing across the black sky, beautiful and otherworldly in that way that never gets old even when you have lived in the Yukon your whole life. I had stopped by my apartment during the day to pick up more clothes, and Michelle had come with me. We were in and out in 15 minutes, both of us jumpy and nervous. That evening, Michelle had a date she could not cancel, some guy she had been seeing for a few weeks. She felt terrible leaving me alone, but I insisted I would be fine. I would stay at her place, lock all the doors, not answer for anyone. The power went out at 8:30, not just in Michelle's building, but the whole neighborhood. Winter power outages were not uncommon in Whitehorse when the temperature dropped below -35 and everyone cranked their heat, overloading the grid. I lit candles, wrapped myself in blankets, tried to read a book by candlelight. The knocking started at 9. Soft at first, almost polite. 3 gentle taps on the door. I held my breath, did not move, prayed whoever it was would think no one was home. The knocking came again, harder this time. Then his voice, muffled through the door but unmistakable. "Rowan, I know you're in there. I can see the candlelight under the door. I just want to talk. Please." I grabbed my phone, but of course there was no signal. Cell towers in Whitehorse were notorious for going down during power outages. I crept to the window, looked down at the street below. Michelle's apartment was on the 3rd floor, too high to jump. The fire escape was on the other side of the building, which meant I would have to go into the hallway to reach it, where Derek was. The doorknob started turning, testing the lock. "I have your spare key," he called out, his voice still eerily calm. "From your apartment. I have been taking care of your place while you have been gone, watering your plants, making sure everything is nice for when you come back." The key slid into the lock. I heard the click of the deadbolt turning. I ran to the bathroom, the only room with a lock on the door, and barricaded myself inside. Pushed the toilet against the door, climbed into the bathtub with the shower curtain pulled closed. Michelle's phone clutched in my hand, even though it was useless. I heard him enter the apartment, heard him moving through the rooms, opening doors, checking closets. "Rowan, this is silly," he was saying, his voice closer now, right outside the bathroom door. "I am not going to hurt you. I would never hurt you. I love you. Do you understand that? I have loved you since the first time I saw you. We are meant to be together." The doorknob rattled, then harder, then the sound of his shoulder hitting the door, once, twice. The toilet I had wedged against it scraped backward across the tile with each impact. In the darkness, I could see the northern lights through the small bathroom window. That ethereal green glow that was supposed to be magical, romantic. All I could think was that if he killed me, that would be the last thing I saw. The door frame cracked on the 4th impact. The door flew open, and he was there, silhouetted against the candlelight from the living room, breathing hard. He had something in his hand. I could not see what it was in the dark, but the way he held it made my blood freeze. That is when Michelle came home. I heard her voice from the front door, confused, calling my name. Derek heard it too. He turned toward the sound, and I made my move. I lunged out of the bathtub, grabbed the ceramic soap dispenser from the sink, and swung it as hard as I could at his head. It connected with his temple with a crack that echoed off the tile walls. He stumbled backward, hit the wall, and I ran past him screaming for Michelle to call the police, to get out, to run. We both made it out of the apartment and down the stairs. By the time we reached the street, neighbors were coming out of their apartments, and someone had flagged down an RCMP patrol car that was driving by. They found Derek in the bathroom, sitting on the floor with blood running down his face from where I had hit him. The thing in his hand was a syringe. The RCMP toxicology later identified it as a sedative, strong enough to knock someone out for hours. He had planned the whole thing, waited for the power outage, knowing my phone would not work, knowing I would be alone. He was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, and possession of a controlled substance. During the investigation, they searched his apartment and found hundreds of photos of me. Photos taken through windows, photos of me walking to work, photos of me sleeping through my bedroom window. He had been watching me for months before he ever set foot in the bar. Derek is in prison now. 5 years, with the possibility of parole in 3. But I do not feel safe. I moved out of Whitehorse completely, down to Vancouver, where the winters are milder and the sun does not disappear for months at a time. I changed my name legally, deleted all my social media, cut contact with everyone except my closest family. But sometimes late at night, when I am alone in my apartment, I hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door, and my heart starts racing. I check the peephole, and no one is there. But I know what it feels like to be hunted, to be watched, to have someone believe so completely that you belong to them that they are willing to destroy your entire life to possess you. The northern lights still show up in my dreams sometimes, but they are not beautiful anymore. They are just the backdrop to that bathroom, that door breaking open, that moment when I understood how close I came to disappearing into the Yukon darkness and never being found. Photography has taken me to some incredible places over the years, but nothing compared to the raw, untamed beauty of the Yukon territory. At 24, I had saved up enough money from freelancing to finally take the road trip I had been dreaming about since college. 3 weeks driving the Alaska Highway from Dawson Creek all the way to Fairbanks, documenting the wilderness, the abandoned gold rush towns, the vast stretches of nothing that made you feel like you were the last person on Earth. My beat-up Toyota 4Runner was packed with camera equipment, camping gear, and enough dried food to survive a month if I needed to. It was early September, and the summer tourists had mostly cleared out, leaving the highway quiet and lonely in that way I had been craving after years of city life in Vancouver. The Alaska Highway is not like other roads. It stretches for over 1,500 miles through some of the most remote wilderness in North America, built during World War II as a military supply route. Most of it cuts through British Columbia, but a significant chunk runs through the Yukon, where services are few and far between. You can drive for hours without seeing another vehicle, and cell phone service is non-existent for long stretches. The locals all warn you to fill up your gas tank whenever you see a station, because the next one might be 200 kilometers away. I had done my research, studied the maps, marked every gas station and rest stop along my route. I thought I was prepared. Day 4 of the trip, I was driving through a particularly desolate stretch between Watson Lake and Whitehorse. The landscape was stunning in that harsh, indifferent way. Boreal forest stretched endlessly on both sides of the road, dark spruce and pine broken up by the occasional clear cut or burn scar from old wildfires. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, and the temperature had dropped to maybe 10 degrees Celsius. I had been driving for 3 hours without seeing another car when I spotted him standing on the shoulder about half a kilometer ahead. A hitchhiker, which was not uncommon on this highway. People broke down all the time, or travelers tried to save money by thumbing rides between towns. As I got closer, I could see he was a man, maybe in his 30s, wearing a faded denim jacket and jeans with a large backpack at his feet. He had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a thick beard that made it hard to see his face clearly. His thumb was out in the classic hitchhiker gesture, and as I approached, he stepped closer to the road with this hopeful expression. I had a rule about not picking up hitchhikers when I traveled alone, especially in remote areas. But something about the emptiness of that highway, the hours since I had seen another human being, made me feel guilty driving past. What if his car had broken down? What if he had been standing there for hours with no help coming? The Yukon wilderness was not forgiving to people stranded without shelter or supplies. I slowed down and pulled over about 20 feet past him. Through my rear-view mirror, I watched him grab his backpack and jog toward my passenger door. He was smiling, showing teeth that were yellowed but straight. And when I rolled down the window, he leaned in with this grateful, almost too friendly demeanor. "Thank you so much," he said, his voice rough, like he had not spoken in a while. "I have been out here for 3 hours. Thought I was going to have to walk to the next town." I asked where he was headed, and he said Whitehorse, which was about 200 kilometers north. Same direction I was going. He introduced himself as Marcus, said his truck had broken down about 10 kilometers back, and he had started walking hoping to flag down help. His story seemed plausible enough. I unlocked the door and let him in. The first 20 minutes were fine. Normal even. Marcus made small talk about the weather, asked about my cameras in the back seat, told me he worked as a hunting guide in the area and was heading back to Whitehorse after a week in the bush. He smelled like campfire smoke and something else I could not quite place. Something chemical and sharp that made my nose itch. But I figured that was just the reality of spending a week camping without proper shower facilities. He was friendly, maybe a bit too chatty for someone who had supposedly been walking for hours, but nothing that set off immediate alarm bells. Then he started asking questions that felt off. Where was I staying in Whitehorse? Was I traveling alone? Did people back home know my exact route? I kept my answers vague, said I had friends expecting me, even though that was not true. My parents knew I was doing a road trip through the Yukon, but I had not given them specific details about my timeline or route. I liked the freedom of being unreachable, of making decisions on the fly without having to check in. Now that freedom felt like a mistake. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at it, then made this frustrated sound. "No service out here," he said, more to himself than to me. "Have not had a signal in days." He glanced at my phone sitting in the cup holder between us. "Yours working?" I picked it up and checked. No signal, which was normal for this stretch of highway. I told him as much, and he nodded. But there was something in his expression that made my stomach tighten. Like he had been testing me, seeing if I had a way to call for help. The conversation shifted after that. Marcus started talking about missing persons cases along northern highways. Said it casually, like he was making idle conversation, but the content was disturbing. "Did you know people disappear out here all the time?" he said, staring out the windshield at the endless forest. "Hitchhikers, travelers, even locals who know better. They just vanish. Sometimes they find the bodies years later, sometimes never. The wilderness just swallows them up." He turned to Duje. "Look at me then," and his eyes were different. Colder. "You seem like a smart girl, though. Probably told someone your route, right? Check in regularly." I lied and said yes. Said my dad was a retired cop and I had to text him twice a day with my location, or he would freak out and call the RCMP. Marcus smiled at that, but it did not reach his eyes. "Smart," he said. "That is real smart." We drove in silence for a few minutes. The only sound, the hum of the engine and the occasional crack of gravel hitting the undercarriage. I kept glancing at him from the corner of my eye, and I noticed he kept touching his backpack, which he had placed between his feet. His hand would go to one of the outer pockets, fingers brushing against something inside, then pull away. Over and over, like a nervous habit. I needed gas. The gauge was showing less than a quarter tank, and according to my map, there was a small service station about 40 kilometers ahead at a place called Rancheria. I told Marcus I was stopping there, and he nodded. "Good idea," he said. "That is actually where my truck is. Broke down right near there. Maybe you could give me a hand getting it started." I'm pretty handy with engines. I did not respond, just focused on the road and tried to calculate how far I could get if I needed to drive without stopping. Could I make it to Whitehorse on what I had? Probably not. The math was not in my favor. The service station appeared through the trees like a mirage. It was one of those old-school operations, a single pump in a small building that served as both a convenience store and repair garage. There were two other vehicles parked near the building, a pickup truck and a sedan, which made me feel slightly better. Other people meant witnesses, safety in numbers. I pulled up to the pump and turned off the engine. Marcus made no move to get out, just sat there, staring at the building. I told him I was going inside to pay, and he smiled again. "I will stay here and watch your stuff," he said, gesturing to my cameras. "You do not want to leave expensive equipment where someone could grab it." Inside, the station was dim and smelled like motor oil and stale coffee. An elderly indigenous woman stood behind the counter, reading a paperback novel. I grabbed a bottle of water and a bag of chips I did not really want, just to have a reason to talk to her. When I got to the counter, she looked up and smiled, but then her eyes shifted past me to the window, where my Forerunner was visible. Her smile faded. "That your truck?" she asked. I nodded. "Who is that with you?" I explained about picking up the hitchhiker, and her expression went from concerned to alarmed. We had a guy come through here about 2 weeks ago with the same story," she said, her voice low. "Said his truck broke down, needed a ride. Young couple picked him up. Their vehicle was found 3 days later abandoned near Teslin. They have not found the couple yet. RCMP put out warnings about picking up hitchhikers in this area." My blood went cold. I asked if she had called the police, and she said she was about to when I walked in. She picked up the phone behind the counter and dialed. I stood there, frozen, watching through the window as Marcus sat in my passenger seat, still touching that pocket on his backpack. The woman spoke quietly into the phone, giving the location and a description. The nearest RCMP detachment was in Whitehorse, she told me after hanging up. About 40 minutes away if they sent someone immediately. She suggested I stay inside until they arrived, but Marcus must have sensed something was wrong. I saw him look toward the building, then down at his backpack. He unzipped the main compartment and pulled something out. Even from this distance, I could tell what it was. Zip ties. A whole bundle of them. He set them on the dashboard, then reached back into the bag and pulled out what looked like duct tape. My entire body started shaking. The woman saw it too. "Back door," she said urgently, pointing toward the rear of the store. "Go now. Get in your truck and drive. Do not stop until you hit Whitehorse." I ran. Through the back room, past shelves of motor oil and spare parts, out into the gravel lot behind the building. I circled around, staying low, using the parked vehicles as cover. Marcus had gotten out of my 4Runner and was walking toward the front entrance of the station, the backpack slung over one shoulder. He had not seen me yet. My keys were still in my pocket, thank God. I'd taken them out of habit when I stopped for gas. I ran to the driver's side door, yanked it open as quietly as I could, and climbed in. The sound of the door closing made Marcus turn. Our eyes met across the lot, and the mask of friendliness he had been wearing completely dropped. What I saw underneath was pure rage. He started running toward me. I jammed the key in the ignition, started the engine, threw it in reverse. He was fast, faster than someone carrying a heavy backpack should be. He reached the truck as I was backing up, grabbed the passenger door handle, tried to yank it open. Locked, thank God. His face was pressed against the window, screaming something I could not hear over the roar of my engine and my own pulse thundering in my ears. I shifted into drive and floored it. The 4Runner lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw Marcus standing in the parking lot, watching me go. He was not panicked, was not trying to run or hide. He just stood there, backpack at his feet, staring after me with that same cold expression. I drove for 90 minutes without stopping, well past Whitehorse, until I found an RCMP detachment in a town called Carmax. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there for 10 minutes, shaking so hard I could barely unbuckle my seatbelt. The officers took my statement, asked me to describe Marcus in detail, showed me photos from their database. I identified him immediately. His real name was not Marcus. It was David Pritchard, and he was wanted in connection with multiple disappearances along Highway 16, the so-called Highway of Tears in British Columbia. He had moved his hunting ground north into the Yukon when police presence increased on Highway 16. The RCMP believed he was responsible for at least 6 missing persons cases over the past 3 years. When they searched the area around the service station, they found his campsite less than a kilometer into the woods. No broken down truck. No reason to be hitchhiking except to find victims. The campsite contained personal items from multiple people. Wallets, IDs, jewelry, photographs. A forensic team found evidence suggesting at least 3 people had been killed there. The backpack I had seen him carrying was recovered from the station parking lot where he had dropped it when he chased me. Inside, along with the zip ties and duct tape, they found a hunting knife, rope, and a syringe filled with animal tranquilizer. David Pritchard was never caught. The RCMP conducted a massive manhunt through the surrounding wilderness, brought in tracking dogs and helicopters, but the Yukon bush is vast and unforgiving. He knew the terrain better than anyone. Some people think he died out there, that the wilderness that had hidden his crimes eventually claimed him too. Others believe he is still out there, Still watching the highway, still waiting for the next solo traveler to make the mistake of stopping. I finished my road trip, but I never picked up another hitchhiker. I drive past them now, even when it is raining, even when they look desperate, because I know what I saw in that parking lot. The way Marcus, or David, or whatever his real name was, just stood there watching me drive away. Not afraid of being caught, not worried about the police, just calculating, already thinking about the next victim, the next stretch of empty highway, the next person who would be kind enough, trusting enough, stupid enough to stop. I still have nightmares about what would have happened if I had driven him further. If we had been an hour deeper into the wilderness when he decided to make his move, how long would I have been missing before anyone came looking? Would they have ever found my Forerunner? Or would it have become just another abandoned vehicle on the Alaska highway? Another unsolved mystery that families whisper about when they warn their children not to travel alone. The elderly woman from the service station called me a few months later. She had gotten my number from the RCMP report. She wanted to tell me about the young couple whose vehicle had been found near Teslin. Their bodies had been discovered by a hunting party, buried in a shallow grave 30 kilometers off the highway. Cause of death was stab wounds, but they had been bound with zip ties first. The police believed they had been held for several days before they were killed. She thought I should know how close I had come, how lucky I had been to listen to my instincts and run when I did. I thanked her and hung up, then sat in my apartment in Vancouver and cried for 2 hours straight. Not just for myself, but for the couple. For the 6 other people David Pritchard was believed to have killed. For everyone who had made the same choice I almost made, to help a stranger on an empty highway, and paid for that kindness with their lives. Working as a museum curator in Dawson City is not the kind of job you stumble into by accident. At 30 years old, I had spent 6 years getting my master's in Canadian history and another 2 volunteering at heritage sites across British Columbia before I finally landed the position at the Dawson City Museum. For anyone who loves history, Dawson City is sacred ground. This tiny town of fewer than 2,000 people was once the epicenter of the Klondike Gold Rush, where over 100,000 prospectors descended between 1896 and 1899, chasing dreams of instant wealth in the frozen Yukon wilderness. Most of them left broken, but the town they built remained, preserved by permafrost and isolation like a time capsule from another century. The museum occupied a beautiful heritage building on 5th Avenue, constructed in 1901 as the old Territorial Administration Building. My job was to catalog and preserve artifacts from the Gold Rush era, everything from mining equipment to personal letters written by prospectors to their families back home. I loved the work, the way touching a miner's tin cup or reading a faded diary entry could transport you back over a century to when Dawson City had been the largest city west of Winnipeg and north of Seattle. The building itself felt alive with history, its wooden floors creaking under your footsteps, the old windows rattling when the wind picked up, the smell of aged paper and antique wood permeating every room. Most of my colleagues worked during regular daytime hours, but I'd volunteered for the evening shifts twice a week. The museum closed to the public at 5, but someone needed to stay until 8 to process new acquisitions and handle climate control systems for the archives. I liked the quiet, liked having the entire building to myself, just me and the ghosts of the past. That was before I discovered that some ghosts might not be as metaphorical as I thought. It started in late October, when the Yukon winter was settling in and darkness came early. By 4 in the afternoon, it was already twilight, and by 5, full dark. The northern lights had been particularly active that month, painting the sky in vivid greens and purples that you could see through the museum's tall windows. I was working in the archives on the 2nd floor, going through a new donation from a local family whose great-grandfather had been a prospector in 1898. The collection included several leather-bound journals, some photographs, and a wooden box containing personal effects. The first strange thing happened when I opened one of the journals. It was bound in cracked brown leather, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting inside was neat but shaky, written in faded ink that I had to squint to read. The entries were dated from July to November 1898, documenting the daily life of a man named Thomas Whitmore. He had come from Philadelphia, left behind a wife and 2 daughters, convinced he would strike it rich and send for them within a year. His early entries were optimistic, full of excitement about the adventure and confidence in his prospects. But as the months went on, the tone shifted. He wrote about the brutal cold, the backbreaking labor, the way men went crazy from isolation and despair. The final entry, dated November 18th, 1898, was different from the rest. The handwriting was erratic, letters slanting wildly across the page. It read, "He knows what I did. He's been following me for 3 days now. I see him in the shadows between the buildings, always watching. I tried to tell Marshal Quinn, but he laughed, said I had gold fever making me see things. But I know what I saw that night at Bonanza Creek. I know what happened to Samuel. And now he is going to make sure I never tell. If someone finds this journal, please send it to my wife, Eleanor Whitmore, 423 Chestnut Street, Philadelphia. Tell her I am sorry. Tell her I loved her and the girls more than any gold." That was the last entry. There was no record of what happened to Thomas Whitmore after November 18, 1898. I made a note to research him in our historical records to see if there was a death certificate or any documentation of his fate. The journal bothered me, though. The fear in those words felt genuine, raw, not the paranoid ramblings of someone driven mad by isolation. Who was Samuel? What had Thomas witnessed at Bonanza Creek? And who had been following him? I set the journal aside and opened the wooden box. Inside were the usual personal effects you would expect from a prospector. A pocket watch that had stopped working at 3:47, the hands frozen in time. A few coins. A photograph of a woman and 2 young girls, probably Thomas's wife Eleanor and their daughters. And buried at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a small leather pouch. When I opened it, several gold nuggets fell into my palm. Not a fortune, but more than enough to suggest Thomas had found at least some success. Why had he never sent it to his family? Why had these items ended up in a donation box more than a century later, instead of being returned to Philadelphia? That night, I stayed late researching Thomas Whitmore in our digital archives and historical records. I found a brief mention of him in the Klondike Nugget newspaper from December 1898. Local prospector Thomas Whitmore found deceased in his cabin on December 2nd. Cause of death undetermined. No signs of foul play. Personal effects to be held by town marshal pending notification of next of kin. So he had died less than 2 weeks after that final journal entry. Cause of death undetermined was interesting. In 1898, Dawson City, people died all the time from exposure, starvation, disease, accidents. Why would the cause be undetermined unless there was something unusual about the death? I kept digging and found something that made my skin crawl. Another newspaper article from November 20th, 1898, 2 days after. Thomas's final journal entry. Body of prospector Samuel Hendricks discovered near Bonanza Creek. Appears to have been murdered, struck from behind with heavy object. Marshal investigating. Anyone with information should come forward. So Samuel, the name Thomas had mentioned in his journal, had been murdered. And Thomas had written that he knew what happened, that he had seen something. Had Thomas witnessed Samuel's murder? Had the killer been following him, ensuring he stayed silent? And had that killer ultimately murdered Thomas too, staging it to look like natural causes? The temperature in the archives dropped noticeably. I could see my breath forming little clouds in the air, which was strange because the climate control system was supposed to keep the room at a steady 18 degrees Celsius to preserve the artifacts. I checked the thermostat on the wall. It showed 18 degrees, but the air felt at least 10 degrees colder. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the main gallery below me. I froze, listening. The museum was supposed to be empty except for me. I had locked the front door myself at 5, had checked all the rooms before settling in to work. The footsteps continued, moving from the gallery toward the staircase that led up to the archives. I called out, asking if anyone was there. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the RCMP, when I heard a voice. Quiet, barely above a whisper, but distinct. He knows. The voice was male, hoarse, with an accent that sounded old-fashioned, formal. Not like anyone spoke anymore. I felt every hair on my body stand up. I was not a believer in ghosts, had always explained away supernatural claims with rational explanations, but standing there in that cold archive room, hearing a disembodied voice whispered the same words Thomas Whitmore had written in his journal 126 years ago, I could not think of any rational explanation. The footsteps started again, coming up the stairs now. I could hear each individual step creaking under weight that should not exist. I backed toward the window, my phone clutched in my hand. The door to the archives was open, and through it I could see the landing at the top of the stairs. A shadow appeared cast by no visible source, stretching across the wooden floor toward me. The shadow of a man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed hat. Then the lights went out. Every light in the building, all at once. The only illumination came from my phone screen and the faint green glow of the northern lights through the windows. In that dim, eerie light, I saw him. A figure standing in the doorway of the archives. He was transparent, like looking through fog, but I could make out details. The old-fashioned clothing, heavy wool coat and boots, the kind prospectors wore, the gaunt face, hollow eyes that stared at me with desperate intensity, and I recognized him. From the pocket watch photograph I had found in the wooden box, the image of a younger, healthier man, but the same face, Thomas Whitmore. His mouth moved, forming words I could barely hear. The journal. Send the journal. She needs to know. His hand, translucent and shimmering, pointed at the leather-bound journal on the desk. Then he turned, looking behind him at something I could not see, and terror crossed his features. He is here. He is always here. The temperature dropped even further. Ice crystals formed on the inside of the windows, and I felt a presence enter the room, something darker and more malevolent than Thomas's frightened spirit. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow, reaching toward me with invisible fingers. Whatever had killed Thomas Whitmore in 1898, whatever had silenced him before he could reveal what he saw at Bonanza Creek, it was still here, still protecting its secret. I ran, grabbed the journal from the desk and ran, my phone flashlight bouncing wildly as I fled down the stairs, through the gallery, my hand shaking so badly I could barely unlock the front door. I burst out into the frozen October night, minus 20 degrees, no coat, but I did not care. Behind me, through the museum windows, I could see shadows moving, shapes that should not exist swirling through the rooms I had just fled. The RCMP officer who responded to my call was skeptical, as I knew he would be. He searched the museum, found no signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been inside except me. The electrical panel showed no reason for the power outage, which had mysteriously resolved itself by the time he arrived. He suggested I had been working too hard, that the isolation and long hours were playing tricks on my mind. I did not argue, just took the journal home with me and spent the rest of the night researching Eleanor Whitmore and her descendants. It took me 3 days, but I found them. Eleanor Whitmore had eventually remarried in 1905 to a man named Robert Chen. She had kept the Whitmore name for her daughters, though, honoring the husband who had disappeared into the Yukon and never returned. Her great-great-granddaughter, Emily Whitmore Chen, lived in Portland, Oregon. I contacted her, explained that I had found her ancestors' journal and personal effects. including gold nuggets he had apparently intended to send home. I offered to mail everything to her, along with the historical context I had uncovered about his death and the possible connection to Samuel Hendricks' murder. Emily was grateful, said her family had always wondered what happened to Thomas, had heard stories that he abandoned them for the gold rush and never looked back. The journal would give them closure, proof that he had loved them, had intended to return. When I mailed the package, I felt a weight lift, like I had completed something important, finished a task that had waited over a century for someone to care enough to see it through. I quit my job at the museum the following week, could not bring myself to go back into that building, knowing what I had seen, what I had felt in those archives. The official reason I gave was that I had accepted a position at a museum in Victoria, which was true, but the real reason was that I could not shake the feeling that some secrets were meant to stay buried. That by uncovering Thomas Whitmore's story, by reading his journal, and connecting the dots to Samuel Hendricks' murder, I had disturbed something that should have remained undisturbed. I still research Yukon history, but I do it from the safety of well-lit libraries during business hours, surrounded by other people. And I never work with Gold Rush artifacts anymore, because sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see that translucent figure standing in the archive doorway, still feel that malevolent presence that had followed him through death. Thomas Whitmore had witnessed a murder in 1898, and the killer had made sure he never told. 126 years later, that killer's spirit was still protecting the secret, still making sure anyone who got too close paid the price. I was lucky to escape with just fear and nightmares. Thomas Whitmore was not so fortunate, and whoever Samuel Hendricks' murderer was, whether they were a prominent citizen whose reputation needed protecting or another prospector hiding a crime, their identity died with them. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some doors should never be opened. I learned that lesson in a frozen museum in Dawson City, and I will carry it with me for the rest of my life. Journalism is not what it used to be. At 32 years old, I had spent a decade working for newspapers that were dying, watching print media collapse under the weight of the digital age. When the White Horse Star offered me a position covering local news and features, I jumped at it, even though the pay was modest and the town was small. I had always been drawn to the north, to stories about resilient communities surviving in harsh environments, and Whitehorse seemed like the perfect place to focus on long-form investigative pieces that the bigger papers no longer had time or budget for. My specialty was cold cases, unsolved crimes that had faded from public memory but still haunted the families left behind. The Yukon had more than its share. A spike in murders in 2017 had left multiple cases without resolution, and over the years, dozens of people had simply vanished into the vast wilderness with no explanation. The RCMP did their best, but with limited resources and enormous territory to cover, some investigations inevitably went cold. I saw it as my job to keep those stories alive, to remind people that behind every file number was a real person whose life had been stolen and whose killer had never faced justice. In September, I started researching a case from 2016. A 34-year-old woman named Jennifer McKenzie had been found dead in her apartment on the Riverdale neighborhood on a Tuesday morning by her co-worker when she failed to show up for her shift at the government office where she worked. The autopsy showed she had been strangled, and the scene suggested she had known her attacker. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, no sexual assault. Just a woman dead in her living room with ligature marks on her neck and no witnesses, no suspects, no leads. The RCMP had investigated for 6 months before the case went cold in 2017. Jennifer's mother, who still lived in Whitehorse, had been calling the detachment every month for 7 years, begging them to reopen the case. She was the one who reached out to me, desperate for someone, anyone to care about finding her daughter's killer. I spent weeks going through old newspaper archives, police reports I obtained through Freedom of Information requests, and interviews with Jennifer's friends and co-workers. The more I dug, the more questions I had. Jennifer had been quiet, kept to herself mostly, but several people mentioned she had seemed anxious in the weeks before her death. One co-worker said Jennifer had confided that she thought someone was following her, that she kept seeing the same car parked outside her apartment building at odd hours. Another friend said Jennifer had mentioned being contacted by someone from her past, someone she had not wanted to hear from. But Jennifer had not elaborated, and now she never would. Then I got the first anonymous message. It came through a burner email address to my work account at the newspaper. The subject line was just Jennifer McKenzie. The body of the email contained a single sentence. "You are looking in the wrong places. Check the property records for 47 Alsek Road in 2015. That was it. No signature, no return information." I tried to trace the email, but hit a dead end immediately. Whoever sent it knew how to cover their tracks. Alsek Road was in the industrial district on the outskirts of Whitehorse. Number 47 was a warehouse that had been abandoned for years, at least according to current records. But when I pulled property records from 2015, I found something interesting. The warehouse had been purchased in March 2015 by a numbered company, 2345678 Yukon Inc., for cash. The company had no other assets, no business registration, nothing that identified who actually owned it. 6 months later, in September 2015, the property was sold again to a different numbered company, which then went bankrupt, and the property reverted to the bank. It was a shell game, money and property changing hands with no clear paper trail. I started asking around about the warehouse, trying to figure out what it had been used for during that 6-month period in 2015. Most people I talked to had no idea, said they never paid attention to that part of town. But one retired truck driver who used to make deliveries in the area remembered something. He said there had been activity at that warehouse in the summer of 2015. Vehicles coming and going late at night. Security cameras installed on the perimeter, which was unusual for an abandoned building. He had assumed it was being used for storage by one of the mining companies, which sometimes leased warehouse space for equipment. But he could not say for sure. The second anonymous message came a week later. This one was more direct. Jennifer found out about the warehouse. She tried to report it. They could not let her talk. Look at who she knew in mining administration. I felt my heart rate pick up as I read it. Jennifer had worked for the territorial government in the Department of Energy, Mines, and Resources. Her job had been fairly low level, processing permits and applications, but she would have had access to records, would have seen documentation about mining operations and land use. If she had stumbled onto something illegal, something that connected to that warehouse, it could explain why she'd been killed. I went to the RCMP with what I had found. A young constable at the Whitehorse detachment listened politely, took notes, but I could tell he was skeptical. Anonymous tips from untraceable emails were not exactly solid leads, he said, and the connection between Jennifer's death and some property transactions 5 years earlier was thin at best. But he promised to pass my information along to the Major Crimes Unit. I left the detachment feeling frustrated but determined to keep digging. That night, I got home to my apartment on 4th Avenue around 8. I lived on the second floor of an older building, the kind with exterior staircases and thin walls where you could hear your neighbors arguing or watching television. The parking lot below was poorly lit, just one street light that flickered more than it illuminated. As I pulled into my usual spot, I noticed a dark SUV parked near the building entrance, engine running, windows tinted so I could not see inside. It gave me an uneasy feeling, but vehicles idled in parking lots all the time in the Yukon winter, people warming up their cars or waiting for someone. I grabbed my bag and headed for the stairs. The SUV door opened as I reached the bottom step. A man got out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy parka with the hood up despite the temperature being only around -10. He walked toward me with purpose, not hurried, but deliberate. I froze halfway up the stairs, keys in my hand. He stopped at the base of the stairs and looked up at me. I could not see his face clearly in the shadows of his hood, but his voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Dakota, right? I hear you have been asking questions about Jennifer Mackenzie." My blood went cold. I asked who he was and what he wanted. He smiled, though I could only see the lower half of his face. "Just a concerned citizen," he said. "Someone who thinks maybe you should focus on other stories. Jennifer's case is old news. Tragic, but old news. No point stirring up trouble when there is nothing to find." I told him I was a journalist and I did not take direction about what stories to cover from strangers in parking lots. He nodded like he expected that answer. "Fair enough," he said. "Just friendly advice. But accidents happen, especially in winter. Roads get icy. People lose control of their vehicles. Would be a shame if something happened to you while you were chasing ghosts." Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. I watched as it pulled out of the parking lot, no license plate on the front, and the rear plate covered in mud to make it unreadable. I ran up to my apartment and immediately called the RCMP. The same constable I had spoken to earlier took my report, said they would increase patrols in my area, but without a clear threat or identifiable suspect, there was not much else they could do. "Stay aware of your surroundings," he advised. "Let us know if anyone approaches you again." The third anonymous email came 2 days later. "You need to back off. They are watching you now. If you do not stop, you will end up like Jennifer." I stared at that message for a long time, weighing my options. I could stop, let the story die, move on to something safer, or I could keep going, knowing that someone dangerous had taken notice of my investigation. The smart choice was obvious. But Jennifer's mother's face kept appearing in my mind, the way she had looked when she begged me to help find answers. I decided to approach it differently. Instead of asking questions openly, I started doing quiet research, using public records and online databases to map connections between people in the mining industry, government officials, and the numbered companies that had owned the warehouse. What I found was a pattern. Multiple properties around Whitehorse had been bought and sold by numbered companies in 2014 and 2015. All cash transactions, all short-term holdings. And several of the people connected to those companies had ties to resource extraction industries and government oversight positions. It looked like a money laundering operation, using real estate to clean profits from something illegal. Then I found Jennifer's connection. In March 2015, she had processed a permit application for a mining exploration company that listed one of those numbered companies as its registered address. The address was 47 Elsek Road, the warehouse. Jennifer would have seen that, would have known something was not right about a legitimate mining company using an abandoned warehouse as its business address. If she had started asking questions internally, if she had threatened to file a report about suspicious activity, someone would have wanted to silence her. I wrote it all up as a detailed investigative article, laying out the timeline, the property transactions, the connections, and Jennifer's potential discovery of the operation. I sent it to my editor at the newspaper, fully expecting him to be excited about breaking a major story. Instead, he called me into his office the next morning looking uncomfortable. He said the article raised interesting questions but was too speculative, that we could not publish allegations about money laundering and murder without more concrete evidence. We would be opening the paper up to lawsuits, he said. I needed to find actual proof, not just circumstantial connections. I argued that the pattern was too clear to be coincidence, but he would not budge. The article was killed. That night, someone broke into my apartment. I had gone out for groceries, was only gone for 40 minutes. When I got back, the door was still locked. Nothing appeared disturbed at first, but then I noticed my laptop was gone from my desk, and the filing cabinet where I kept hard copies of my research had been jimmied open, the files all removed. They had taken everything related to the Jennifer Mackenzie investigation, every document, every note. every printout. Even the backup flash drive I kept in my desk drawer was gone. They had been thorough and professional. The RCMP dusted for prints found nothing. No signs of forced entry meant whoever did it had picked the lock or had a key. I filed a report but knew it would go nowhere. The fourth anonymous message was different from the others. It did not come through email. It was a handwritten note slipped under my apartment door sometime after midnight. I found it when I got up to use the bathroom at 3 a.m. The note was written in block letters on plain white paper. Final warning. Jennifer knew too much and look what happened to her. Stop now or you are next. They mean it. This is not a game. I spent the rest of that night sitting on my couch with all the lights on, checking the locks every 20 minutes, jumping at every sound in the hallway. By morning, I had made my decision. I called Jennifer's mother and told her I was sorry, but I could not continue the investigation. Someone powerful did not want the truth to come out, and I had pushed as far as I could without ending up dead myself. She cried on the phone, said she understood, but please do not give up on Jennifer. I promised I would not forget her daughter, but I needed to step back for my own safety. It was the hardest phone call I have ever made. I left Whitehorse 2 months later, took a job at a newspaper in Calgary covering city council meetings and business news. Safe, boring stories that nobody threatens you over. But I think about Jennifer Mackenzie every day, about whoever killed her getting away with it because they were connected enough, powerful enough, ruthless enough to intimidate anyone who got too close to the truth. The RCMP never reopened her case. The warehouse on Alsek Road was eventually demolished in 2022. Whatever secrets it held are buried under a new development of condominiums. And Jennifer's mother still calls the RCMP detachment every month, still hoping someone will care enough to find her daughter's killer. But I know now that some cases stay cold not because there are no leads, but because the people with answers make sure no one lives long enough to expose them. I learned that lesson in Whitehorse, and it cost me my courage and maybe my integrity. But at least I'm alive. Jennifer was not so lucky. At 27 years old, I thought I had found my dream job. Geologist positions do not open up every day, especially ones that let you work in remote wilderness areas, documenting mineral deposits and conducting environmental assessments. When Northern Horizons Exploration hired me for a 6-week contract at their exploration camp near Faro, I was thrilled. The money was excellent. The work was exactly what I had studied for during my master's program at UBC, and the chance to spend 6 weeks in the Yukon backcountry felt like an adventure. The company was exploring potential copper deposits in an area that had seen historic mining activity in the mid-1900s, but had been dormant for decades. My job was to collect core samples, analyze mineral content, and help determine whether the site had enough commercial potential to justify a full-scale mining operation. The camp was located about 200 kilometers northeast of Whitehorse, accessible only by helicopter or a rough service road that took 4 hours to drive in good weather. There were 8 of us staying at the camp, 3 other geologists, 2 drill operators, a camp cook, a site supervisor named Derek, and me. We lived in prefabricated cabins that had been helicoptered in and assembled on site, with a communal building for meals and meetings. The nearest town was Faro, population 300, and even that was a 2-hour drive away. Cell phone service was non-existent. We had a satellite phone for emergencies and a radio for communicating with the company office in Whitehorse, but otherwise, we were completely isolated. The first 2 weeks were routine. We worked 10-hour days, 6 days a week, collecting samples and running preliminary analysis. The landscape was stunning in that harsh Yukon way. Boreal forest thick with spruce and pine, mountains rising in the distance with early snow on their peaks, even though it was only September, and a river running through a valley about 3 kilometers from camp that was so clear you could see the rocks on the bottom. At night, We would sit around a fire outside the communal building, drinking beer and swapping stories. It felt like the kind of experience I would look back on fondly for years. Derek, the site supervisor, was the only one who seemed perpetually on edge. He was maybe 45, with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades working outdoor jobs in harsh environments. He had been with Northern Horizons for 8 years, worked dozens of exploration sites across the Yukon and Northwest Territories. But something about this particular site seemed to bother him. He would disappear for hours during the day, claiming he was checking the perimeter or inspecting equipment. But I noticed he always took his satellite phone with him. At night, he would sit apart from the rest of us, smoking cigarettes and staring into the darkness beyond the firelight with this intense expression. The third week, things started feeling wrong. Small things at first. Equipment that we had stored in the supply shed would be moved or rearranged overnight. Core samples that I had carefully labeled and documented would have different labels or be missing entirely. One of the drill operators, a guy named Marcus, mentioned that fuel was disappearing from the generator supply faster than our usage could account for. We all assumed it was just disorganization, people forgetting where they had put things, or miscalculating fuel consumption. But then we found the second camp. I was hiking about 5 kilometers west of our site, doing a geological survey of an area that showed promising mineral indicators. The terrain was rough, steep hills covered in loose rock and dense vegetation. I crested a ridge and looked down into a small valley, and that is when I saw it. Another camp, similar to ours, but smaller. 3 cabins and what looked like a work area with tarps covering something large. There were no vehicles visible, no signs of current activity, but the structures were in good condition. Not abandoned, just empty at that moment. I radioed back to our camp, asked Derek if he knew about another exploration operation in the area. There was a long pause before he responded. His voice was tense. "Do not go near it. Come back to camp immediately. That site is not ours." When I got back, Derek pulled me aside, away from the others. He asked me exactly what I had seen, how close I had gotten, whether I had taken photos. I told him everything. Said I had not approached the camp, just observed it from the ridge. He seemed relieved but still worried. "That site is not affiliated with any legitimate mining company," he said quietly. "I found it during my perimeter checks 2 weeks ago. I reported it to the company, and they told me to stay away from it, to keep the crew focused on our work and not mention it to anyone. But now that you have seen it, I need you to understand something. There are people operating in this area who do not want to be found. Do not go back there. Do not talk about it with the others." Of course, I immediately wondered what kind of operation would be running secretly in the middle of nowhere. The most obvious answer was illegal mining. People extracting minerals without permits or environmental oversight, avoiding taxes and regulations. But Derek's reaction suggested it was something worse. Over the next few days, I could not stop thinking about it. The curiosity was eating at me. What were they hiding under those tarps? Why was our company so quick to tell Derek to stay away instead of reporting it to authorities? And why did Derek seem scared rather than just concerned? I made the mistake of mentioning it to Sarah, one of the other geologists. We were processing samples together in the lab cabin, and I casually asked if she had noticed anything strange about the site, about Derek's behavior. She admitted she had been wondering the same things. 2 days earlier, she had seen a vehicle approaching our camp late at night, a truck with no headlights, just driving slowly past on the service road before continuing deeper into the wilderness. She had mentioned it to Derek, and he had told her she must have been mistaken, that no one used that road except us. But she knew what she had seen. That night, Sarah and I made a decision we would both come to regret. We decided to hike back to the other camp early the next morning before anyone else was awake, just to get a closer look, maybe take some photos we could send to authorities once we got back to civilization. We set our alarms for 4:30. planning to leave at 5 when it would be light enough to hike safely, but early enough that the rest of the crew would still be sleeping. We made it to the ridge overlooking the camp by 6:15. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the valley. The camp looked the same as when I'd first seen it, quiet and seemingly empty. But as we watched from the tree line, 2 men emerged from one of the cabins. They were dressed in work clothes, carrying equipment we could not identify from our distance. They walked to the area covered by tarps and began uncovering what was underneath. Even from 500 meters away, we could see it was not mining equipment. It was barrels. Dozens of 50-gallon drums arranged in neat rows. The men started moving the barrels, loading them onto a flatbed trailer attached to a quad. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "We need to go," she whispered, "right now." But before we could move, one of the men looked up toward the ridge. I do not know if he saw us or just sensed something, but he pulled out a radio and spoke into it. Within seconds, 2 more men came running out of the cabins, and one of them had a rifle. We ran, crashed through the brush, not caring about the noise, just trying to put distance between us and whatever we had stumbled onto. Behind us, I could hear engines starting up, quads revving. They were coming after us. The terrain was not in our favor. The valley between their camp and ours was mostly open ground, scattered trees, and rocky outcrops that provided little cover. Sarah was faster than me, pulled ahead by 20 meters. I heard the crack of a rifle shot and threw myself behind a boulder. The shot had not been close, probably just a warning or a wild shot from a moving vehicle, but it meant they were serious about stopping us. I looked back and saw 2 quads cresting the ridge, the men on them scanning the landscape. I pressed myself flat against the rock, trying to control my breathing, trying to think. We were at least 4 kilometers from our camp, too far to run in open ground with armed men pursuing us. Sarah had disappeared into a dense patch of forest to my left, and I prayed she had found good cover. The quads circled for maybe 10 minutes, the men shouting to each other, engines cutting, in and out as they searched. Then I heard Derek's voice, distant but unmistakable, calling out. He was negotiating with them. I could not hear the exact words, but the tone was placating, apologetic. After a few minutes, the quad engines faded away, heading back toward their camp. Derek appeared at the edge of the forest, looking around. "Charlie, Sarah, if you can hear me, they are gone. Come out. It is safe." I waited another 5 minutes before emerging from behind the boulder. Sarah appeared from the trees shortly after, her face pale and scratched from branches. Derek looked furious and terrified in equal measure. "What the hell were you thinking?" he hissed. "I told you to stay away from there. Do you have any idea what you have done?" I asked who those men were and what was in those barrels. Derek looked like he wanted to lie, but he must have decided there was no point. "They are dumping toxic waste," he said finally. "Industrial chemicals, mining tailings, probably other hazardous materials. They pay to dispose of it properly, but instead, they are burying it out here where no one will find it for decades. And our company knows about it." That hit me like a physical blow. Our company knows. I repeated the words, trying to process them. Derek nodded miserably. Northern Horizon subcontracts waste disposal to the same company that runs that camp. They have been dumping illegally for years, saving millions on proper disposal costs. The exploration work we are doing here is real, but it also provides cover for the dumping operation. Trucks and helicopters coming and going, people working in the area. It all looks legitimate. He gestured back toward our camp. I tried to quit when I found out 2 weeks ago, but they told me if I walked away or reported it, I would have an accident out here. They have done it before. People disappear in the Yukon wilderness all the time. I felt sick. The pristine environment I had been admiring for 3 weeks was being poisoned, deliberately and systematically, and I had been part of it without knowing. Sarah asked what happened with the men from the other camp. Why did they let us go? Derek's expression darkened. I told them you were new hires who did not know the situation, that I would explain everything and make sure you kept quiet. They agreed to let you live on one condition. You finish the contract, you do not contact anyone, and when you leave here in 3 weeks, you never mention what you saw. If you try to report it, they will find you. These are not people who make idle threats. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. We went through the motions of our work, collecting samples, running tests, filing reports, all while knowing that a few kilometers away, tons of toxic waste were being buried in the Yukon wilderness. Every helicopter that flew over, every vehicle that passed on the service road, I wondered if it was carrying more poison to be hidden in the ground. Sarah and I barely spoke. The guilt and fear were consuming us both. When the helicopter finally came to extract us at the end of the 6 weeks, I felt a mixture of relief and shame. We flew over the valley where the dumping camp was located, and I could see fresh earth had been turned, new sites dug and filled. How much damage had been done over the years this operation had been running. How many water sources had been contaminated. How much wildlife would die slowly from poisoning they could not see or understand. I never reported it. Neither did Sarah. We both knew Derek had been serious about the threats, and we were too afraid to risk our lives over something we could not prove. I had no photos, no documentation, nothing that would stand up as evidence. And even if I did, who would believe that a legitimate exploration company was providing cover for illegal toxic waste dumping? I left the geology field entirely after that contract ended. Could not bring myself to work in an industry where something that corrupt could happen. Sometimes I think about contacting environmental authorities, sending an anonymous tip about the location. But then I remember those men with rifles, remember the casual way Derek explained that people disappear in the Yukon, and I stay silent. The waste is still there, buried in permafrost that will eventually thaw as climate change advances, releasing toxins into the watershed. And I know about it. I could have stopped it, or at least tried. Instead, I chose to live, to keep quiet, to be complicit. That is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Being a wilderness guide in the Yukon is not a job you take for the money. At 29, I had been leading hiking expeditions into Cloyne National Park for 4 seasons, and the pay barely covered my expenses during the short summer months when tourists were willing to venture this far north. But I loved it. Loved showing people the raw beauty of Canada's largest national park, the endless ice fields, the jagged peaks of the St. Elias Mountains, the valleys where grizzly bears and Dall sheep roamed free. Cloyne covers over 22,000 square kilometers, most of it true wilderness, where humans are just visitors passing through. That vastness, that sense of being small and insignificant against the scale of nature, was why I kept coming back year after year. The booking came in late August, near the end of the season when most tour companies were already shutting down for winter. A group of 5 wanted a week-long backcountry trek into the Alsek Valley, one of the more remote areas of the park. The client contact was a man named Stephen Reeves, who said he and his friends were experienced hikers from Vancouver, looking for a challenging route away from the popular trails. The price they offered was generous, enough that I could not really afford to turn it down, even though something about the timing felt off. Most experienced hikers knew that late August in the Yukon meant rapidly changing weather, early snow at higher elevations, and wildlife that was getting aggressive as they prepared for winter. But Stephen insisted they understood the risks and had proper gear. We met at the Parks Canada office in Haines Junction, where all backcountry expeditions had to register and get permits. The group consisted of Stephen, who was maybe 40, with the fit build of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors, 2 other men named Craig and Michael, who were similar in age and demeanor, and a younger couple, Amanda and Josh, who looked to be in their mid-20s. They all had expensive equipment, top-of-the-line packs and boots and technical clothing. On paper, they seemed prepared, but something felt wrong from the start. The way Stephen kept checking his phone, even though we were about to head into an area with no cell service. The way the three men kept exchanging looks when I outlined the route and safety protocols. The couple seemed nervous, quieter than you would expect from people about to embark on an adventure they had supposedly been planning for months. The first 2 days were uneventful. We hiked about 15 kilometers each day, following game trails through spruce forests and across open tundra meadows. The weather held, cool but clear, with temperatures dropping to around 5 degrees Celsius at night. We camped at designated sites, cooked meals over portable stoves, followed all the proper procedures for bear safety and waste disposal. Stephen and the other 2 men were in good shape, kept up easily with the pace I set. But Amanda and Josh struggled. They were fit enough, but it was clear they were not as experienced as Stephen had claimed. Amanda had blisters by the end of day 1, and Josh had packed his bag wrong, putting too much weight up high, which was throwing off his balance on uneven terrain. On the 3rd day, things started to get strange. We were hiking through a narrow valley with steep walls on either side, following a creek that fed into the Alsek River. The terrain was rough, lots of loose rock and sudden elevation changes. I was leading, as usual, with the group strung out behind me in single file. We came around a bend, and I saw something that made me stop. A campsite. Not a designated Parks Canada site, just a clearing near the creek, with the remains of a fire pit and several areas where tents had obviously been set up recently. The ground was torn up, vegetation trampled, and there were food wrappers scattered around that animals had gotten into. Someone had camped here within the last few days, and they had done a terrible job of following leave no trace principles. I radioed Parks Canada on my satellite communicator, reported the illegal campsite. They said they would send rangers to investigate, but it would be a few days before anyone could get out to this remote location. In the meantime, I should document it with photos and GPS coordinates. As I was taking pictures, Michael called out from further down the creek. He had found something. When I got there, I saw what he was pointing at. A backpack, half submerged in the creek, wedged between rocks. It was a standard hiking pack, blue and gray, completely soaked but otherwise intact. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were clothes, a sleeping bag, a first aid kit, and a wallet. The ID in the wallet belonged to someone named David Morrison from Calgary. The issue date was 2021, and the photo showed a man in his 30s. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Someone had lost their pack, which could mean they were in trouble, injured, or lost somewhere in this vast wilderness. I radioed Parks Canada again, gave them the details. They checked their records and said no one named David Morrison had registered for a backcountry permit in the past month. That did not necessarily mean anything. Some people illegally hiked without permits, trying to avoid fees or avoid having their itinerary tracked. But combined with the illegal campsite, it suggested something was not right. Stephen seemed very interested in the backpack. He asked to see the ID, examined it closely, then asked what I planned to do with the pack. I told him I was required to turn it over to Parks Canada as found property. He nodded but seemed disappointed. That evening at camp, I noticed Stephen and the two other men having an intense conversation away from the fire, their voices low. When I approached to discuss the next day's route, they stopped talking abruptly. Day 4, we hiked deeper into the valley. The landscape was stunning, raw mountains, rising on all sides. A glacier visible in the distance, its blue ice gleaming in the sun. But I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Amanda kept trying to catch my eye like she wanted to tell me something, but was afraid to speak in front of the others. During a water break, she fell back from the group and whispered that she needed to talk to me privately. I told her we would talk that evening after we set up camp. We found another illegal campsite that afternoon. This one was even more disturbing. Multiple tent sites, evidence of a much larger group than regulations allowed, and what looked like freshly dug holes in the ground that had been filled back in. I started digging in one of the holes with my trekking pole. About a foot down, I hit something soft. I pulled it up. It was another backpack, deliberately buried. This one belonged to someone named Sarah Chen, according to the ID inside. What the hell was going on? Why were people's backpacks being buried in the backcountry? Stephen saw what I had found, and his expression changed. No more friendly hiker pretense. He looked at Craig and Michael and nodded toward me. That is when I realized I was in serious danger. I asked what was happening, why these backpacks were buried out here. Stephen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You are clever, Blake," he said, using my name in a way that felt like a threat. "But you have stumbled into something you should not have. These packs belong to people who came out here looking for something specific. People who paid a lot of money to access areas that are supposed to be protected, and people who sometimes do not make it back out." My mind was racing. Were they talking about illegal hunting? Poaching in a national park would explain the secrecy, the illegal campsites, the buried evidence. But the way Stephen said people who do not make it back suggested something darker. I looked at Amanda and Josh, saw fear in their faces. They were not part of whatever this was. They were victims, just like I was about to be. I made a run for it, dropped my pack to move faster, and bolted into the trees, heading uphill toward rougher terrain, where I would have the advantage as someone who knew the park. Behind me, I heard shouting, the sound of people crashing through brush in pursuit. I ran for maybe 20 minutes, my lungs burning in the thin mountain air, until I found a dense thicket of willows near a creek. I crawled in and tried to control my breathing, listening for sounds of pursuit. It took them a while, but eventually I heard voices. They were spreading out, searching systematically. I realized my satellite communicator was still in my pack, which I had abandoned. My only link to outside help was gone. I had a knife, a water bottle, and the clothes on my back. It was getting dark, temperature already dropping toward freezing. If I did not find shelter and warmth, hypothermia would kill me before Stephen and his men found me. I waited until full dark, then started moving again. I navigated by starlight and the faint green glow of the northern lights that were beginning to dance across the sky. I was heading northwest, toward an area where I knew there was a Parks Canada Ranger cabin about 30 kilometers away. It would take me 2 days to reach on foot, assuming I did not run into bears or get lost. But it was my only chance. The next 2 days were a nightmare of cold, hunger, and fear. I hiked during the day, hid and tried to sleep during the night. I had no sleeping bag, no tent, just my fleece jacket and the clothes I had been wearing. The temperature dropped below freezing both nights, and I spent hours huddled against trees, doing jumping jacks to stay warm. I saw signs the Stevens group was still looking for me. Boot prints on soft ground, broken branches where people had pushed through brush. At one point, I heard a helicopter low and slow searching. That terrified me because there was no reason for a helicopter to be conducting a search unless Parks Canada had been notified I was missing. But I knew I had not been reported missing yet, which meant Stephen had resources I had not anticipated. On the third day, I reached the ranger cabin. It was locked, but I knew where Parks Canada kept emergency keys hidden for situations exactly like this. Inside was warmth, food, and most importantly, a radio. I called it in, reported everything. My abandonment, the illegal campsites, the buried backpacks, Stephen and his operation. Within hours, a search and rescue helicopter arrived. RCMP officers were airlifted into multiple locations in the valley. What they found made national news. Stephen Reeves was running a black market hunting operation, bringing wealthy clients into the park to illegally hunt protected species like grizzly bears and Dall sheep. The people whose backpacks we had found were clients who had refused to pay or had threatened to report the operation. Stephen had killed them, buried their bodies in remote locations, and kept their identification to prevent the bodies from being identified if they were ever found. Amanda and Josh were discovered at a campsite 10 kilometers from where I had fled. They were alive but traumatized. Stephen and his men were arrested trying to fly out from a remote airstrip on the park boundary. The RCMP recovered 5 bodies from locations Stephen eventually disclosed. David Morrison and Sarah Chen were among them. 3 others had been missing for over 2 years. I testified at the trial, helped convict Stephen and his accomplices, but I never went back to guiding. Could not bring myself to return to Cluane, knowing that the pristine wilderness I had loved concealed graves of people who had trusted the wrong guide. The park is still beautiful, still wild and magnificent, but it is also a reminder that humans can bring darkness even to the most remote places on Earth. Teaching in remote indigenous communities was always something I had wanted to do. At 26, I had finished my education degree at the University of Victoria and applied to positions across northern Canada, looking for places where teachers were desperately needed and where I could make a real difference. When the job offer came from Chief Zay Gitlett School in Old Crow, Yukon, I barely hesitated before accepting. Old Crow is the most remote community in the Yukon Territory, sitting above the Arctic Circle with a population of around 250 people, almost entirely Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation. The town is accessible only by air. No road connects it to the rest of the territory, and in winter, the nearest help is a 2-hour flight away if weather permits flying at all. I arrived in late August, just before the school year started. The flight from Whitehorse took about 90 minutes in a small turboprop plane that seated maybe 20 people. As we descended, I could see the Porcupine River winding through endless boreal forest, the town itself just a small cluster of buildings against the vast wilderness. The landing strip was gravel, and when I stepped off the plane, the cold hit me immediately, even though it was still technically summer. The sun hung low on the horizon, and I realized we were approaching the season when daylight would start disappearing rapidly, leading to the long Arctic winter darkness. The community welcomed me warmly. The school principal, an older Gwitchin man named Robert, showed me to my apartment, a small unit in one of the teacher housing buildings. He explained the realities of life in Old Crow. Everything came in by air, which made supplies expensive and sometimes scarce. Internet was satellite-based and unreliable. The school served students from kindergarten through grade 12, with about 60 students total. And most importantly, I needed to respect and learn about Gwitchin culture and traditions if I was going to be effective here. The first few weeks were an adjustment, teaching multiple grade levels in one classroom, dealing with technology that barely worked, adapting to a community where everyone knew everyone, and outsiders were viewed with polite but distant curiosity. But I loved it. The kids were smart and resilient, growing up in an environment that demanded toughness and resourcefulness. The landscape was stunning, endless tundra stretching to the horizon, the northern lights dancing overhead almost every clear night, a wildness that made everywhere else I had lived seem tame and crowded. It was during my 3rd week that I first heard about the vanishings. I was having tea with Martha, one of the elder women who worked as a cultural liaison at the school, teaching traditional Gwitchin language and customs. She was telling me stories about Old Crow's history, the seasonal migration patterns the Vuntut Gwitchin had followed for thousands of years, the impact of residential schools, the resilience of the community. Then she mentioned, almost casually, that the land around Old Crow held spirits that did not always welcome outsiders. I asked what she meant, thinking it was traditional folklore. She got very serious. Over the past 40 years, she said, more than a dozen people had vanished from Old Crow and the surrounding area. Not deaths that could be explained by accidents or natural causes, but disappearances. People who went out on the land, hunting or fishing or checking trap lines, and simply never came back. Some were community members, Gwitchin people who knew the territory better than anyone. Others were outsiders, government workers, or researchers, or teachers like me. Search parties would be organized, areas would be scoured, but no trace would be found. No bodies, no equipment, no signs of what had happened. Just empty wilderness where a person used to be. I asked if the RCMP investigated these cases. Martha nodded. Of course they did, but Old Crow was so remote, so vast, that searches were limited by weather, daylight, and resources. After a few weeks, if nothing was found, the cases would be classified as lost in wilderness, presumed dead. Families would grieve, life would move on. But the community remembered, kept track of the pattern, and the elders noticed things that outsiders missed. What kind of things? I asked. Martha looked out her window at the darkening landscape. The people who disappeared, she said quietly. They all shared something in common. In the weeks before they vanished, they reported seeing things. A figure in the distance that moved wrong, too fast or too slow, always at the edge of vision. Hearing voices calling their names when they were alone on the land. Finding strange marks near their homes or camps, symbols scratched into wood or stone that did not match any Gwich'in tradition. And they all mentioned feeling watched, feeling like something was tracking their movements, learning their routines. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Martha saw my expression and patted my hand. Just respect the land, she said. Do not go out alone, especially as winter comes. Stay with others. If you see or hear something strange, do not investigate. Do not engage. Come back to town immediately. The old ways teach us that some things are best left alone. I thanked her for the warning, though part of me wanted to dismiss it as superstition. I was a rational person, educated, modern. I did not believe in malevolent spirits or supernatural predators, but over the next month, I started noticing things that made me reconsider. Students would mention seeing someone outside the school windows at night, a tall figure that would stand motionless for hours, then disappear when anyone approached. Dogs in the community would bark frantically at certain areas on the edge of town, refusing to go past invisible boundaries. And I started having dreams, vivid and disturbing, of walking through endless forest while something followed just out of sight, matching my pace exactly, getting closer each time I had the dream. Then Samuel disappeared. He was a community member, 38 years old, experienced hunter and trapper, who had lived in Old Crow his entire life. He went out on his snowmobile in early November to check his trap line about 20 kilometers from town, a routine trip he had made hundreds of times. He radioed back that evening to say he was camping overnight and would return the next morning. He never did. The search began immediately. Snowmobile tracks were followed to his camping spot, where his tent was found set up properly. Fire pit still containing warm ashes. His snowmobile was there, undamaged. His rifle was there, unfired. His supplies were there, untouched. Samuel was simply gone. The RCMP flew in from Whitehorse, organized search parties with community volunteers. They searched for a week, covering hundreds of square kilometers. Nothing. Samuel had vanished from a campsite with no signs of struggle, no indication of where he had gone or why. The temperature that night had been minus 35 Celsius. If Samuel had walked away from camp without his gear, he would have died of exposure within hours, but no body was found. It was as if he had been plucked from the campsite and removed from existence. The community held a gathering in Samuel's honor, though they could not hold a proper funeral without a body. People shared memories, cried, tried to make sense of the senseless. Martha pulled me aside afterward. "You need to leave," she said urgently. "Go back south before winter fully sets in. Samuel was one of us, knew the land, knew the signs. If the land took him, no outsider is safe." I asked what she meant by the land taking him. She shook her head. "We do not speak of it directly. Naming it gives it power. But our stories go back generations. Something lives in the territory around Old Crow. Something old and patient and hungry. It does not take often, maybe one person every few years. But when it decides to feed, nothing can stop it. And it has noticed you." I felt my blood turn cold. "How do you know it noticed me?" I asked. "Because 3 people in the past week have seen it outside your apartment," she said, "standing in the dark, watching your windows. You match the pattern, Emerson. Young, outsider, alone much of the time. Just like the teacher who disappeared in 1996. Just like the nurse who vanished in 2008. Just like the government worker who went missing in 2015. All young, all outsiders. All taken within their first 6 months in Old Crow. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside my window made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. At 3 a.m, I got up to get water and looked out my kitchen window. There was someone standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 meters away. A tall figure, completely motionless, facing my building. I could not see details in the darkness, but I could feel it watching. I turned on every light in my apartment and called Robert, the school principal. He came over immediately, brought 2 other community members with him. By the time they arrived, the figure was gone, but they found tracks in the fresh snow. Not human tracks, not animal tracks, something in between, too large and shaped wrong. Robert did not try to convince me to stay. He made arrangements for me to leave on the next flight, which was in 2 days. I would forfeit my contract, lose my position, but I would be alive. Those 2 days were the longest of my life. I stayed with Martha and her family, refusing to be alone even for a minute. The figure appeared each night, always at the same time, always watching. Other community members saw it too. Started leaving offerings at the edge of town, traditional practices to appease spirits and ask them to leave the living alone. The morning of my flight, Robert drove me to the airstrip on his snowmobile. The plane was delayed by weather, and we waited in the small terminal building for 3 hours. Through the window, I could see the figure at the far end of the runway, standing in the open, fully visible, in daylight for the first time. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with proportions that were almost but not quite human. Its skin, if you could call it that, seemed to shift and blur, making it hard to focus on. And it was watching me. When the plane finally arrived and I boarded, the figure remained motionless. As we took off, I looked down and saw it turn and walk back toward the tree line, with movements that were too smooth, too fluid, like it was gliding rather than walking. I never went back to Old Crow. I teach now in Victoria, in a school with 500 students and security cameras and parking lots surrounded by streetlights. But sometimes at 3 a.m, I wake up and feel like I am being watched. And I know that somewhere in the wilderness north of the Arctic Circle, something old and patient is still hunting, still taking people when it chooses, still evading every attempt to explain or understand it. Samuel's body was never found. Neither were the bodies of the dozen others who vanished over the decades. And the Vuntut Gwich'in continue to live in that place, respecting the land and its secrets, knowing that some mysteries are not meant to be solved by outsiders like me. Truck driving was never supposed to be my forever career, but at 31 years old, I had been hauling freight across Western Canada for almost a decade. The pay was decent, the freedom appealed to me, and I liked the solitude of long highway drives where I could listen to audiobooks and podcasts for hours without interruption. My regular route took me from Prince George, British Columbia, up through the Yukon on the Cassiar Highway and Alaska Highway, delivering supplies to remote communities and mining operations. It was a demanding route, especially in winter, but the company I worked for paid well for drivers willing to handle the Northern Territories. The Cassiar Highway has a reputation among truckers. It is not as notorious as Highway 16, the Highway of Tears, where dozens of women have disappeared over the decades, but it runs parallel to it through some of the most remote wilderness in British Columbia and the Yukon. The highway stretches for over 700 kilometers, much of it unpaved, passing through areas where services are scarce and cell phone coverage is non-existent. In winter, temperatures regularly drop below -40 Celsius. And if your truck breaks down in the wrong spot, you could freeze to death before help arrives. Every trucker who runs the Cassiar has stories about close calls, mechanical failures in the middle of nowhere, wildlife on the road, and the eerie isolation that comes from driving for hours without seeing another vehicle. I'd been running the route for 6 years when I first saw the vehicle. It was early October, the shoulder season when tourist traffic had ended, but winter conditions had not fully set in yet. I was heading north toward Watson Lake, the last major town before entering the Yukon proper. It was around 9 at night, full dark at that latitude and time of year, and I had been driving for 8 hours straight. My headlights were the only illumination for kilometers in every direction, cutting through the darkness and occasionally catching the reflective eyes of animals in the forest. That is when I saw it, on the shoulder ahead, a white sedan, hood up, emergency flashers blinking. It looked like a breakdown, which was common enough on this highway. I slowed down as I approached, checking for people around the vehicle. No one was visible. I pulled over about 50 feet past the sedan, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed down from my cab. The temperature was already around -10, and my breath formed clouds in the beam of my flashlight as I walked back to the sedan. The car was a Toyota Camry, maybe 10 years old, Alberta plates. The hood was propped open, and when I looked at the engine, everything appeared intact. No obvious mechanical failure, no leaking fluids, no visible damage. The driver's door was unlocked, and when I opened it, the interior light came on. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the on position, but the engine was not running. There was a purse on the passenger seat, a phone in the cup holder, and a jacket draped over the back seat. Personal belongings that suggested whoever had been driving had not planned to abandon the vehicle, but there was no one around. No footprints in the dirt shoulder leading away from the car. No signs of a struggle. Just an empty vehicle with the hood up and flashers on. I tried the phone, but it was locked with a passcode. The purse contained a wallet with identification for a woman named Claire Patterson from Edmonton. There was also a phone charger, some makeup, and a crumpled receipt from a gas station in Dease Lake dated 2 days earlier. I called out, shining my flashlight into the forest on both sides of the highway. No response. Just the sound of wind through the trees and the occasional creak of my truck's engine cooling. I radioed my dispatcher, reported the abandoned vehicle and the location. She said she would contact the RCMP detachment in Dease Lake, which was about 80 kilometers south. In the meantime, I should continue my route. There was nothing more I could do, and stopping for too long in this cold was dangerous. I took photos of the vehicle, the license plate, and the identification in the wallet, then placed everything back where I found it and continued north to Watson Lake. 2 weeks later, I was running the same route in the opposite direction, heading south from Whitehorse back toward Prince George. It was late afternoon, still light enough to see clearly. And there it was again, the same white Toyota Camry, hood up, flashers on. But we were now 300 kilometers north of where I had seen it before, near the junction with the Alaska Highway. I pulled over immediately, my heart pounding. This made no sense. How could the same vehicle be in a completely different location? Had it been moved? Had someone driven it here and abandoned it again? I approached cautiously this time, feeling uneasy in a way I had not during the first encounter. The car was in the same condition. Hood up, keys in the ignition, personal belongings inside. But when I checked the purse, the wallet was gone. The phone was still there, now completely dead. And on the driver's seat was a map of the Yukon, spread out with a route marked in red pen from Dease Lake to Dawson City. Someone had been planning a road trip through the territory. But where were they now? I called the RCMP again, this time reaching an officer directly instead of going through my dispatcher. I explained that I had found the same vehicle in 2 different locations 2 weeks apart. The officer sounded skeptical at first, asked if I was sure it was the same car. I gave him the license plate number, which I had written down during the first encounter. He put me on hold, came back a few minutes later with a different tone. That vehicle was reported abandoned near Dease Lake 2 weeks ago, he said. We towed it to an impound lot in the area. It should not be on the highway, at all, let alone 300 kilometers north. He asked me to wait at the location while they sent a unit to investigate. I waited for over an hour in my truck, engine running to stay warm, watching the sedan in my side mirror. The sun set, and darkness fell. The car's flashers kept blinking, a rhythmic pulse of orange light in the blackness. Finally, headlights appeared from the south. An RCMP SUV pulled up behind my truck, and 2 officers got out. I met them at the sedan and explained everything again. They examined the vehicle, checked the VN number, radioed back to their detachment. After about 20 minutes, one of them came over to me looking confused. "This is definitely the same vehicle that was impounded in Dees Lake," he said, "but according to our records, it is still in the impound lot. Someone called this morning to confirm it was there. So either our records are wrong or this is a different vehicle with the same plate." They decided to have the car towed again, this time to the Watson Lake impound. They took my statement, contact information, and the photos I had taken during both encounters. As I drove away, I watched in my rearview mirror as they hooked up the sedan to a tow truck. Something about the whole situation felt deeply wrong, but I could not articulate why. 3 weeks later, I was heading north again on the Cassiar. It was November now, snow on the ground, temperatures around -25. I was approaching the area where I had first seen the sedan, about 80 kilometers south of Dees Lake. And there it was, same white Toyota Camry, hood up, flashers blinking. Third time, third different location. My hand started shaking on the steering wheel. This was impossible. The car had been towed twice. It should be in an impound lot, not sitting on the shoulder of a remote highway with its hood up like some kind of ghost ship. I did not stop this time. I grabbed my radio and called it in while I was still driving, giving the location and description. The dispatcher sounded alarmed, said she would contact RCMP immediately. I kept driving, but I watched the sedan in my mirror until it disappeared from view. That night, when I stopped at a truck stop in Dees Lake to refuel and sleep, I asked the attendant if he had heard about any strange vehicle sightings on the Cassiar. He looked at me with this odd expression. "You mean the white sedan?" he said. "Yeah, everyone has seen it. Been showing up at different spots along the highway for the past 2 months. Always with the hood up, always abandoned. RCMP has towed it 4 times now. Keeps reappearing. Some guys think it is a ghost car, connected to one of the missing persons cases from years back." He told me about a woman who had disappeared on the Cassiar Highway in 2019. She had been driving from Edmonton to Alaska, planning to relocate for a job. Her car, a white Toyota Camry, had been found abandoned with the hood up and her personal belongings inside. Despite extensive searches, she was never found. No body. No trace of where she had gone. The case went cold after 6 months. The car had eventually been sold at auction. But now, 6 years later, vehicles matching that description kept appearing on the highway, in impossible locations. I asked if the current car was the same one from 2019. He shrugged. "RCMP will not confirm it," he said, "but the VIN numbers match, and the woman's family swears they never bought the car at auction. So how is it back on the highway? Some truckers refuse to drive this route at night anymore because of it. They say if you stop to help, something bad happens. You become the next person to disappear." I have driven the Cassiar Highway 6 more times since that conversation. Every single time, I have seen the white sedan. Sometimes near Dees Lake, sometimes closer to the Yukon border, once as far north as Teslin. Always in a different spot. Always with the hood up and flashers on, always empty. And I have never stopped again, because the last time I did, on my most recent trip in December, I saw something that made my blood freeze. As I drove past, my headlights swept across the sedan, and for just a second I saw someone sitting in the driver's seat. A woman, young, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. By the time I hit the brakes and looked back, the car was empty again. Just darkness and those blinking orange lights. The RCMP has stopped responding to reports about the sedan. They have towed it so many times that they have given up trying to explain how it keeps reappearing. Some officers privately admit they think the highway is haunted, that something about the remoteness and the history of disappearances has created a phenomenon they cannot rationally explain. Claire Patterson, the woman who disappeared in 2019, is still listed as a missing person. Her family still calls the RCMP every month, begging for updates. And her car, or something that looks exactly like it, continues to appear on the Cassiar Highway, luring drivers to stop, to investigate, to become the next unexplained disappearance in a place where wilderness swallows people and secrets alike. I will not be one of them. I drive past now, no matter how guilty it makes me feel, because I know that some things are not meant to be helped. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some roads demand a price from those who travel them, a price I am not willing to pay. Social work in the Yukon is not like social work anywhere else. At 25 years old, I had graduated from my Master of Social Work program at McGill University with idealistic notions about helping vulnerable populations and making a real difference in people's lives. When I accepted a position with the territorial government in Whitehorse, I knew the work would be challenging. The Yukon has some of the highest rates of substance abuse, domestic violence, and mental health issues in Canada, compounded by the isolation, harsh climate, and intergenerational trauma affecting Indigenous communities. But I thought I was prepared. I thought my education and my passion for justice would be enough to handle whatever I encountered. I was wrong. My caseload consisted of about 35 clients, mostly Indigenous women and their families, dealing with issues ranging from poverty and housing insecurity to domestic violence and child protection concerns. Whitehorse is a small city, only about 30,000 people, which means everyone knows everyone. You cannot go to the grocery store without running into clients. You cannot have a beer at a bar downtown without seeing people whose files are sitting on your desk. The boundaries between professional and personal life blur in ways that never happen in bigger cities, and it creates a constant underlying tension. One of my clients was a woman named Jasmine Nolan. She was 32, Kwanlin Dune First Nation, mother of 2 young daughters. Jasmine had been on my caseload for about 4 months, referred by her doctor, who was concerned about signs of domestic abuse. Jasmine had bruises that she explained away as clumsiness, a broken wrist that she claimed came from slipping on ice, and a withdrawn demeanor that suggested she was living in constant fear. I had met with her 6 times, each visit in her small apartment in the McIntyre subdivision. She would make tea, we would talk, and she would insist everything was fine, that her boyfriend Marcus was good to her and the girls, that she did not need help. But I knew the signs. I had been trained to recognize them. The way she flinched when there was a loud noise. The way she positioned herself in the apartment so she could always see the door. The way her daughters, age 4 and 7, were unnaturally quiet and well-behaved, showing the hyper-vigilance that comes from living in an unpredictable and dangerous environment. I had tried to convince Jasmine to leave, had given her information about the women's shelter, had explained the protection orders she could obtain through the courts. She always thanked me politely and changed the subject. Then she missed 3 appointments in a row. That was not unusual in social work. Clients missed appointments for all kinds of reasons, from transportation issues to simply forgetting, but something about Jasmine's pattern felt wrong. I called her phone repeatedly. No answer. I left voicemails. No response. I contacted her doctor, who said Jasmine had also missed 2 medical appointments. Finally, I decided to do a wellness check, driving to her apartment on a Thursday afternoon in late November. The McIntyre subdivision is one of the older residential areas of Whitehorse, with a mix of single-family homes and small apartment buildings. Jasmine lived on the ground floor of a 4-unit complex on Pelly Road. When I pulled up, I noticed the curtains in her apartment were drawn, which was not unusual, but there were no lights on inside, even though it was already getting dark. I knocked on the door, called out Jasmine's name, waited. No response. I tried the doorknob, locked. I walked around to the side window, the one that looked into the kitchen. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see dishes piled in the sink, and something dark on the floor near the hallway. It looked like liquid, possibly blood. My heart started racing. I called the RCMP immediately, explained that I was conducting a wellness check and had seen what appeared to be blood inside the apartment. They said they would send officers right away. While I waited, I walked back to my car and noticed Marcus's truck parked 3 spaces down. A black Ford F-150 with Alberta plates that I recognized from previous visits. If his truck was here, was he inside the apartment? Was Jasmine hurt? Were the daughters safe? 2 RCMP officers arrived within 15 minutes. I explained the situation, showed them where I had seen the possible blood through the window. They knocked on the door, identified themselves, demanded it be opened. No response. One of the officers went to the landlord's unit upstairs and obtained a key. When they opened the door, I smelled it immediately. That metallic, nauseating smell of blood mixed with something else, something rotten. The officers went in first, hands on their weapons, clearing each room. I waited outside, nauseous and terrified. After maybe 5 minutes, one of them came back out, his face pale. "You need to call for backup and a detective," he said to his partner. "We have a crime scene. Jasmine was found in the bedroom. She had been dead for at least 2 days, the coroner later estimated. Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. The apartment showed signs of a violent struggle. Furniture overturned, blood spatter on the walls, broken glass from picture frames that had been thrown or knocked over. The 2 daughters were not in the apartment. Neither was Marcus. An Amber Alert was issued immediately for the girls. A warrant was issued for Marcus's arrest, and I sat in my car outside the apartment complex, shaking uncontrollably, knowing that I should have done more, should have found a way to convince Jasmine to leave, should have predicted this outcome. The investigation moved quickly. Marcus's truck was found abandoned at a rest area on the Alaska Highway, about 100 kilometers north of Whitehorse. There was blood in the truck bed, though forensics would later confirm it was animal blood, not human. Security footage from a gas station in Haines Junction showed Marcus purchasing supplies, including duct tape and rope, the morning after Jasmine was killed. He had the 2 girls with him in the footage. They appeared unharmed but frightened. After that sighting, he vanished. No credit card usage, no phone pings, no further sightings. The RCMP organized massive search parties, brought in helicopters and tracking dogs, checked every remote cabin and abandoned building within a 300-kilometer radius. Nothing. The theory was that Marcus had fled into the wilderness with the girls, planning to hide out until the investigation died down or attempting to cross into Alaska through the backcountry. But winter was setting in. Temperatures were dropping to -30 at night, and survival in the Yukon wilderness without proper preparation was nearly impossible, especially with 2 young children. As days turned into weeks, the hope of finding the girls alive diminished. The community held vigils, organized volunteer search parties, posted flyers across the territory. Jasmine's family was devastated, her mother collapsing during a press conference where she begged Marcus to bring her granddaughters home. Then I started receiving the messages. The first one came 3 weeks after Jasmine's murder, sent to my work email from an untraceable account. "You should have helped her. This is your fault. She trusted you and you did nothing. Now her daughters will die in the cold because you failed." I reported it to the RCMP, but they said there was nothing they could do without more information about who sent it. Probably just someone from the community venting anger, they said. Do not take it personally. But the messages continued. Every few days, a new one would arrive, each more detailed and threatening than the last. "I know where you live. I have been watching you. You let Jasmine die, and now you will understand what it feels like to be hunted." I started seeing the same vehicle parked outside my apartment at night, a dark SUV with tinted windows. When I walked to my car in the morning, I would find scratches on the doors, symbols carved into the paint that I did not recognize. My apartment was broken into while I was at work. Nothing was stolen, but items were moved, rearranged. Photos of Jasmine from her case file were left spread across my kitchen table. The RCMP increased patrols around my building, but Whitehorse is a small detachment with limited resources. They could not provide 24-hour protection, especially not when they were still actively searching for Marcus and the missing girls. I was told to be vigilant, to vary my routines, to report any direct threats immediately. But I felt hunted, paranoid, looking over my shoulder constantly. I stopped going out after dark, stopped answering my door unless I knew exactly who was there, slept, with a knife under my pillow and a chair wedged against the bedroom door. 6 weeks after Jasmine's death, on a Friday night in early January, I came home from work to find my apartment door ajar. I'd locked it that morning, I was certain. I called the RCMP from my car, waited for them to arrive and clear the apartment. Inside, they found something that made my blood run cold. Messages written on the walls in red paint. "You could have saved them. You will pay for your failure." And in my bedroom, spread across my bed, were the clothes Jasmine's daughters had been wearing the day they disappeared. The RCMP bagged everything as evidence, questioned me for hours about who might have access to those clothes, who might be targeting me. The investigation took a disturbing turn. Forensic analysis of the paint used on my walls matched paint found at another location, an abandoned house on the outskirts of Whitehorse, where the RCMP discovered evidence that someone had been living. Not Marcus, someone else. The house contained surveillance photos of me, detailed notes about my schedule, maps of Whitehorse with my apartment and workplace marked. And disturbingly, it contained information about Jasmine's case that should not have been public knowledge. Details from police reports, autopsy findings, witness statements. Whoever was doing this had access to confidential investigation files. The RCMP quietly began investigating whether someone within their own department or the territorial government might be involved. The possibility that a colleague, someone I worked with and trusted, might be stalking and threatening me was almost worse than the threats themselves. I stopped going to work, took medical leave for stress and trauma. I moved in with a friend who lived in a different neighborhood, stopped driving my own vehicle, changed my phone number. But the feeling of being watched never went away. Marcus and the 2 girls were never found. The case remains open, but the active search was called off after 3 months, when it became clear that survival in winter wilderness for that length of time was impossible. The community held a memorial service for the girls, even though there were no bodies to bury. Jasmine was laid to rest in a ceremony attended by hundreds, and I carried the guilt of not doing enough, not pushing harder, not somehow preventing the tragedy that unfolded. The stalking eventually stopped. After about 4 months, the messages ceased. The surveillance photos stopped appearing. The vehicle outside my apartment disappeared. The RCMP never identified who was responsible. Their internal investigation found no evidence of compromised files or corrupt employees, though they admitted that lack of evidence did not mean it had not happened. The prevailing theory was that someone connected to Marcus, a friend or family member, who blamed me and the social services system for Jasmine's death, had conducted a campaign of intimidation before either being arrested for something unrelated or simply moving on. I left the Yukon 6 months after Jasmine's murder, moved to Ottawa, took a government desk job that involved no client contact, no field work, no possibility of encountering the kind of tragedy that had destroyed my faith in my ability to help people. I still have nightmares about Jasmine's apartment, about the smell of blood and death, about those little girls who were last seen frightened and confused in a gas station video, who likely died of exposure in the frozen wilderness while their father, if he had any humanity left, watched helplessly, or perhaps mercifully did not let them suffer long. The Yukon is beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. It keeps secrets in its vast wilderness, secrets about what happened to Marcus and those girls, secrets about who stalked and threatened me, secrets that will never be fully revealed because the land simply does not give up its dead. And I learned that sometimes the people we are meant to protect cannot be saved, no matter how hard we try, and that failure can haunt you more thoroughly than any ghost. Being a park ranger in the Yukon is supposed to be about conservation and wilderness management, not dealing with the kind of horror I encountered on the top of the World Highway. At 33 years old, I had worked for Parks Canada for 8 years, stationed at various locations across the territory before being assigned to the Dawson City area. The top of the World Highway connects Dawson City to the Alaska border, a spectacular but treacherous route that winds through mountain passes at elevations over 1,200 meters. The highway is only open from late May to mid-September, closed the rest of the year due to snow and extreme cold. During the brief summer season, it sees a steady stream of adventurous tourists heading between Canada and Alaska, drawn by the stunning scenery and the literal crossing of an international border in the middle of nowhere. My duties included patrolling the highway, checking on campgrounds, responding to wildlife conflicts, and generally ensuring that visitors to this remote area stayed safe and followed regulations. It was solitary work, sometimes going days without seeing another person, just me and the endless boreal forest, the caribou herds, and the midnight sun that kept the sky bright almost 24 hours a day in June and July. I loved it. The isolation felt like freedom, and the landscape had a raw beauty that never stopped taking my breath away. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in late August. A family of tourists driving from Dawson City to Chicken, Alaska, had reported finding what they described as an abandoned campsite that looked like people had left in a hurry. Food was still out, a campfire was still smoldering, tents were unzipped and open, but no people were anywhere to be found. The location was about 40 kilometers from the border crossing, in a pull-out area that was not an official campground, but where people sometimes stopped to camp for the night. The family had not touched anything, just taken photos, and driven to the nearest point where they had cell service to report it. I drove out there immediately, taking my truck along the gravel highway that twisted through mountain passes and offered views that tourists paid thousands of dollars to photograph. When I arrived at the location, I saw exactly what the family had described. 2 tents, both set up properly and staked down with sleeping bags visible inside. A campfire ring with logs arranged around it for seating, the coals still warm when I touched them carefully. A cooler sitting open with food inside that had been partially eaten. A portable stove with a pot that contained what looked like oatmeal, cold but not yet congealed, suggesting it had been made that morning or the night before. And most unsettling personal items scattered around. Phones, wallets, car keys, even glasses that someone who needed them to see would never voluntarily leave behind. But no people. I called out, searched the immediate area, hiked about 1 kilometer in each direction from the campsite. Nothing. No one responded. No signs of where the campers might have gone. I radioed back to the Parks Canada office in Dawson City, reported what I found, requested backup, and potentially search and rescue resources. While waiting, I documented everything, took photos, made notes, tried to piece together what had happened. The identification in the wallets belonged to 4 people. 2 couples, both from Washington State, traveling together. David and Michelle Carter, ages 28 and 26. Robert and Sarah Jenkins, ages 31 and 29. Their vehicle, a rented SUV, was parked at the pullout with the keys sitting on the driver's seat. Nothing appeared to be stolen. Nothing appeared to be damaged. It was as if 4 people had simply stood up mid-breakfast and walked away from their entire lives. Within hours, RCMP officers arrived from Dawson City, along with a search and rescue coordinator. We organized a grid search of the surrounding area, bringing in volunteers from the community and using GPS to track every square meter we covered. The terrain was challenging, dense forest mixed with rocky outcrops and steep slopes. Lots of places where someone could fall and be injured. lots of areas where visibility was limited. But we were experienced searchers, knew how to read the land, knew what signs to look for. We found the first body on day 2 of the search, about 3 kilometers from the campsite. Michelle Carter. She was lying in a small ravine, partially hidden by undergrowth. No obvious signs of trauma, no blood, no indication she had fallen or been attacked. She was just lying there on her back, eyes open, staring at the sky. When the medical examiner arrived and did a preliminary examination, he found no cause of death, no injuries, no signs of illness, nothing that would explain why a healthy 26-year-old woman would be dead in the Yukon wilderness. The second body was found that same day, about a kilometer from where we found Michelle. David Carter, her husband. Same condition. Lying on the ground as if he had simply laid down and died. No trauma, no obvious cause. Just a corpse in the middle of the forest. The search intensified. If 2 of the 4 campers were dead under mysterious circumstances, the other 2 might be as well. Or they might be injured, lost, desperately needing help. Day 3, we found Robert Jenkins. This time, he was not on the ground. He was in a tree, about 4 meters up, wedged in the branches like he had climbed up and could not or would not come down. Dead, eyes open, same lack of obvious trauma. The medical examiner was baffled. 3 people, all dead, all with no discernible cause of death, all found in strange locations as if they had wandered away from camp in random directions and simply expired. Sarah Jenkins remained missing for another 2 days. On day 5 of the search, we found her. She was the furthest from the campsite, almost 6 kilometers away, sitting upright against a tree. Also dead. Also showing no signs of what had killed her. The medical examiner collected samples, said he would need to run extensive toxicology tests, check for exotic poisons or environmental contaminants. But he admitted he had never seen anything like it. 4 healthy adults, dead within hours of each other, scattered across kilometers of wilderness, with no explanation. The autopsies took weeks. The results were disturbing not for what they showed, but for what they did not show. No poison, no disease, no drugs, no carbon monoxide or other gas exposure, no heart conditions or strokes or aneurysms. The medical examiner finally listed the cause of death for all 4 as undetermined, which is the professional way of saying we have no idea what killed these people. But the RCMP investigation uncovered something that made my skin crawl. In going through the digital files on the phones we found at the campsite, they recovered photos and videos from the night before the campers disappeared. The footage showed them sitting around the campfire, talking and laughing, everything seeming normal. Then, around 11 at night, one of them, Michelle, pointed into the forest beyond the firelight and asked what that was. The video becomes shaky as the person holding the phone, probably David, tries to focus on what she was pointing at. You can see something moving in the darkness. Not an animal. The movement is wrong. Too smooth, too deliberate. Something tall and vaguely humanoid but distorted, like looking at a reflection in warped glass. David's voice on the video says, maybe it is a moose or a bear, but you can hear the uncertainty. Then Sarah says it is getting closer. The video pans around the campsite, and you can see all 4 of them standing up now, backing away from whatever is approaching. Robert says they should get in the vehicle and leave. But before anyone can move, the video cuts out. Just goes black. The timestamp shows it was 11:43 p.m. Based on the condition of their breakfast and the campfire, the RCMP estimated they disappeared sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. The theory that emerged, though no one wanted to say it officially, was that the campers had encountered something in the forest that night, something that had caused them to flee the campsite in different directions, running blindly into the wilderness, something that had pursued them or affected them in a way that caused their deaths without leaving physical evidence. What that something was, no one could explain. Wildlife attack would leave marks. human assailant would leave evidence. Environmental hazard would have a detectable signature, but here is what really disturbed me. After the bodies were recovered and the investigation was wrapping up, I was asked to go back to the campsite area and remove any remaining equipment that had been left behind during the search. It was late, September by then, the highway about to close for winter. When I arrived at the location, I found something that had not been there before. Scratched into the bark of a tree near where the tents had been set up were symbols. Not random scratches, but deliberate marks, repeating patterns that looked almost like writing, but in no language or alphabet I recognized. They had not been there during our initial investigation. Someone or something had made them in the weeks since. I took photos, reported it, sent the images to linguistics experts and indigenous cultural advisors, trying to figure out if the symbols had any meaning. No one could identify them. They did not match any known indigenous writing system or traditional markings. They were just there, carved into the tree as if something wanted to leave a message, but we lacked the ability to understand it. The case was officially closed as 4 deaths due to undetermined causes. The families of the victims were given the autopsy reports and the personal belongings we recovered, though we kept the phones as evidence of what might have been captured on video. The story made national news for a few days, with speculation ranging from rare environmental toxins to mass panic disorder to serial killer operating near the border. But without evidence, speculation was all anyone had. I finished out the season, but when winter came and I had time to think about what I had seen, I requested a transfer. I could not shake the feeling that we had encountered something on the top of the World Highway that defied explanation. Something that lived in that vast border wilderness, in the hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, where jurisdiction between Canada and Alaska became blurry and enforcement became nearly impossible. Something that had killed 4 people in a way that left no trace, no evidence, no understanding. The highway opened again the following summer, and tourists continued to drive it, oblivious to what had happened the previous year. Campfires were lit at that same pullout. Tents were set up. People took photos of the stunning views and posted them on social media with captions about adventure and wilderness. I wondered if any of them saw something moving in the darkness beyond the firelight. Wondered if any of them heard sounds that did not match any known animal. Wondered if any of them would become the next unexplained disappearances that park rangers and RCMP would search for in vain. I work now in Jasper National Park in Alberta. Busy, popular, relatively safe, but sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up thinking about those symbols carved into the tree, those 4 bodies scattered across kilometers of forest, that distorted shape moving in the darkness of the video footage. And I know that there are places in the north, along that border between nations and between the known and the unknown, where something exists that we do not understand, something patient and inhuman that occasionally reaches out and takes people, leaving only questions and fear in its wake. David, Michelle, Robert, and Sarah learned the truth too late. I learned it with just enough time to escape, but their deaths remain unsolved. Their families remain without closure, and the top of the World Highway remains open every summer, inviting the next travelers to camp in the wilderness and discover what lurks just beyond the light.